Big Shaq's mom was ridiculed at Jiu Jitsu class until she stepped onto the mat and submitted a black belt in 10 seconds, silencing the laughter and flipping the script. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sun slanted through wide windows, its golden rays painting patches of light on the polished wooden floor of the Triumph Martial Arts Academy. Outside, the city hummed with the noise of cars, pedestrians, and life as usual. But inside, the air was heavier, weighted not with silence, but with a particular kind of quietness, the kind that thrums just beneath the surface of casual conversations and polite smiles. Lucille O'Neal stepped through the academy's front doors, her frame tall and solid, shoulders squared with a dignity that made some glance up in surprise. Her presence was neither hurried nor tentative. Clad in a simple pale blue workout jacket and black leggings, her salt and pepper curls framed a face marked by years of quiet resilience. She walked with the kind of poise that came not from arrogance, but from a deep, unshakable core. A few students clustered near the reception glanced over, their eyes flicked from her face to her clothes, to the subtle lines around her mouth, then back to their conversation, their voices dropping to low murmurs. Lucille caught the glances but did not react. Her footsteps were steady as she approached the check-in desk, where a young receptionist with a fixed smile greeted her, fingers tapping nervously against a clipboard. "Ms. O'Neal here for the afternoon class?" the receptionist asked, voice high and a touch too cheerful. Lucille nodded. "Yes, ma'am," she replied, her tone warm but firm, the slightest trace of southern lilt coloring her words. She signed in, her handwriting neat, her signature confident. As she moved toward the training mats, she felt eyes following her, lingering not in curiosity but in judgment. In the far corner of the room, two instructors leaned against the wall. One, a broad-shouldered man named Travis, crossed his arms, watching her with narrowed eyes. His companion, a slender woman named Sierra, leaned in to whisper something, her lips curling into a smirk. Their conversation was quiet, but the implication rang clear. The older woman, with her plain clothes and unfamiliar face, didn't belong here. Lucille approached the edge of the mats, where the class was already forming lines. Most students were younger, athletic, quick to flash grins or stretch out in practiced ease. She noted the subtle shuffles, as some students adjusted to put distance between themselves and her. A few whispered, eyes darting away when she turned. She knew this kind of exclusion, this delicate social maneuvering, all too well. She had seen it in boardrooms and grocery stores, in waiting rooms and banks. Here it played out beneath the veneer of sportsmanship and discipline, the unspoken rule that some bodies, some backgrounds, were welcome only as shadows. But Lucille did not retreat. She stepped forward, found her place in line, and waited as the instructor called the class to attention. The room quieted, the sound of feet shifting on the mats replaced by the instructor's clipped commands. Travis's voice carried easily, practiced and sure. He glanced down the line of students, his gaze brushing over Lucille like she was an afterthought. "Welcome, everyone. Today we'll be working on submission transitions and ground control," he said. His tone was professional, but when his eyes met Lucille's, there was a subtle tightening around his mouth, a flicker of something between amusement and dismissal. As warm-ups began, Lucille moved with precision. Her movements were controlled, her breathing steady. Though she didn't match the younger students in speed, her technique was clean, her posture firm. Yet each time a partner was assigned, she noticed students hesitating, glancing toward the instructors, as if seeking permission to decline. When Sierra paired her with a younger man named Brent, his handshake was limp, his smile tight with forced politeness. "Let's make it quick," Brent muttered, barely meeting her gaze. Lucille's smile didn't waver. "Of course," she replied, her tone smooth. As they worked through the drills, Brent rushed the movements, clearly uninterested in genuine practice. Each time Lucille corrected her form or made a subtle adjustment, he rolled his eyes or exaggerated his movement. The tension was palpable, but Lucille maintained her composure, her mind focusing not on the whispers or smirks, but on her breathing, on the deliberate flow of each technique. At the edge of the mat, a cluster of students gathered, whispering behind their hands. One of them, a wiry young woman with a streak of pink in her hair, tilted her head toward Lucille and said, not quite quietly enough, "She's gonna get crushed if she tries to roll today." The words hung in the air like smoke. A few students laughed nervously, while others avoided looking in Lucille's direction. Travis said nothing, merely crossed his arms, and continued watching. Sierra, leaning casually near the wall, smirked. Lucille continued with the drills, her face calm but her eyes steady, catching every glance, every whispered word. She wasn't unfamiliar with these kinds of moments. They were like background noise to her life, persistent, petty, but never enough to shake her resolve. As the class moved into live rolling sessions, students began to pair off. Lucille stood at the edge of the mat, waiting. No one approached her. Some pretended not to see her. Others murmured excuses, as they gravitated toward younger, more agile partners. Travis clapped his hands. "Come on, folks. Let's get moving." A few students glanced her way, then quickly paired with others. Brent, now sparring with a friend, shot her a look that mixed pity with disdain. Lucille's hands tightened into fists for a moment, then relaxed. She adjusted her stance, her posture as steady as a tree's trunk. In that moment, a shadow fell across the mats. As the front door opened, the sunlight pouring through framed a figure tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a simple jacket and jeans. Lucille O'Neal stepped into the academy, his presence quiet but commanding, conversations hushed, heads turned, and even Travis's smug expression flickered with uncertainty. Shaq's gaze swept the room, his expression unreadable, as he took in the scene. His mother standing alone on the mat, the students clustered away from her, the instructors lounging at the edges. Without a word, he inclined his head slightly toward Lucille, a subtle gesture of acknowledgement that carried more weight than a shout. Lucille's shoulders straightened just a fraction more. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, an expression not of triumph, but of quiet assurance. The sunlight continued to stream through the windows, casting long golden lines across the mat, as the academy fell into a tense silence, waiting for the next move. The following morning, sunlight poured through the expansive windows of the Triumph Martial Arts Academy, gilding the hardwood floors with its glow. The usual hum of conversation buzzed beneath the surface. Students laughing softly, shoes squeaking on the polished mats, instructors issuing clipped commands. But today, the undercurrent carried a different, sharper edge. Whispers rose and fell like uneasy waves. Phones were tucked hastily into pockets. Glances darted toward the front desk where the screen of a tablet flashed with the day's headlines. A video had surfaced overnight, spreading faster than wildfire through social media feeds and private group chats. It was shot on a shaky phone camera, showing a young black student, DeAndre, in the academy's beginners class. The video captured a moment of uncomfortable laughter, a coach mimicking DeAndre's movements in a mocking, exaggerated style, while other students tittered in the background. DeAndre, his cheeks flushed red with humiliation, stood frozen, his eyes darting helplessly around the room as if searching for an exit. The clip was brief, but the implications were clear. Comments on the video ranged from outrage to disbelief, while others, more insidious, defended it as harmless fun. The academy's name was splashed across local headlines. Some instructors tried to downplay the incident as a misunderstanding, but the damage had been done. Conversations buzzed around the edges of the mat, sharp with indignation or laced with dismissive humor. Lucille O'Neal stood near the entrance, her arms folded loosely over her chest. She had watched the video earlier that morning, her breath catching as she witnessed the casual cruelty, the thin veneer of sportsmanship stripped away to reveal something uglier. She didn't know DeAndre personally, but she recognized the look on his face, the one that spoke of silent endurance, of knowing that speaking up would only make things worse. It was a look she had seen reflected back at her too many times in her life. The academy's announcement came shortly after. Travis, the head instructor, stood at the front of the mat, his voice carrying with practiced authority. "Due to the overwhelming response to our classes and the spirit of competition, we're holding a special open mat challenge today," he declared, his grin wide and rehearsed. "All belt levels welcome to step up and showcase their skills. Submissions only, show us what you've got." A murmur of surprise rippled through the students. Open mat sessions were usually reserved for higher belts, rarely for newcomers or lower-ranked practitioners. The announcement felt more like a distraction than a celebration, an attempt to shift focus away from the controversy swirling around the academy. Lucille's lips pressed into a thin line. She watched as the instructors scanned the room, their gazes resting dismissively on the younger, less experienced students, as though silently daring them to step forward. DeAndre was conspicuously absent from the mat, though his name lingered in whispers that trailed across the floor. Travis continued, "Volunteers, Who's ready to put their skills to the test? There was a pause. A silence thick with anticipation, punctuated by the nervous shuffling of feet. A few eager students glanced around, waiting for someone else to step forward. Then, Lucille moved. She stepped onto the mat with deliberate calm, her steps measured, her posture radiating quiet defiance. Conversations stilled. Heads turned. The murmur of surprise built like a slow crescendo. Travis's eyebrows shot up, his expression tightening for a split second before he covered it with a thin smile. "Ms. O'Neal," he said, his tone light but edged with condescension. "Joining us today?" Lucille met his gaze steadily. "I believe I will," she said, her voice even, but carrying. The room held its breath, the unspoken disbelief threading through the gathered students like electricity. Some snickered quietly, shaking their heads. A few exchanged glances, their thoughts transparent. She doesn't belong here. This isn't her place. One of the assistant instructors, a younger man named Drew, stepped forward, his smile uncertain. "Are you sure, ma'am? Maybe it'd be best—" "I'm sure," Lucille interrupted, her voice smooth but unyielding. She stepped into the circle forming on the mat, her movements controlled, her expression serene despite the storm of whispers swirling around her. Outside, the city moved on, traffic bustling, phones buzzing with the latest headlines. Shaquille O'Neal, miles away, was immersed in meetings with city leaders, working on a new community center in a historically underfunded neighborhood. His schedule was packed with calls, handshakes, and quiet moments of planning. The news from the academy hadn't yet reached him. His focus was on the bigger picture, unaware that his mother was stepping into a storm of her own. Inside the academy, the atmosphere thickened. Travis cleared his throat, scanning the students. "All right then," he said, his voice carrying a forced brightness. "Let's see what you've got. First up against Ms. O'Neal, who's willing to take the challenge." The room fell into a charged silence. Some students looked away, others nudged their friends, smirking behind their hands. Finally, a young man named Chase stepped forward, his stance cocky, his smirk wide. He was a mid-level belt, confident in his skill and eager for a spectacle. "I'll take her," Chase said, his voice loud and dismissive. Lucille inclined her head, the faintest trace of a smile touching her lips. She didn't speak, didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she turned to face him, her hands relaxed at her sides, her breathing steady. The instructor clapped his hands. "All right, begin." Chase lunged, quick and showy, his movements designed to impress the onlookers more than to control the situation. Lucille sidestepped with practiced ease, her balance flawless. Chase circled, his confidence faltering slightly, as he realized she wasn't reacting as expected. He feinted left, then shot forward, but Lucille's response was smooth, almost effortless. She shifted her weight, catching him in a controlled sweep that sent him off balance, his shoulder tapping the mat with a soft thud. The crowd gasped, the sound sharp against the quiet room. Chase scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment. He charged again, more aggressively this time. But Lucille's movements were precise, economical. She avoided his flailing attempts, her calmness a stark contrast to his frustration. Finally, with a deft shift, she maneuvered him into a submission hold, not harsh but undeniable. Chase tapped the mat quickly, his breath ragged, his pride stung. The room was silent, the tension thick. Lucille stood, adjusting her jacket with calm grace. She offered Chase a hand to help him up, her gesture steady and respectful. He hesitated, then took it, his eyes darting away. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the whispers resumed, louder now, laced with disbelief and reluctant admiration. Lucille stepped back, her gaze sweeping the room, her expression unreadable. Outside, the city's pulse continued, unaware that inside this small studio, a quiet challenge had been issued and met. And as Lucille stood there, alone but unbowed, she made a silent vow. She wouldn't let DeAndre's humiliation be swept under the mat like dust. She would face this head-on, not with shouts or protests, but with a strength that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. And in that silent moment, as the crowd parted, Lucille O'Neal became more than just a student. She became the quiet reckoning that no one saw coming. What none of them knew was that Lucille had faced down worse than whispers and side glances. She had endured far more cutting remarks than what had just passed her by. And as the scene at the academy faded, her mind slipped back into memory, A rewind to a time before the world knew the name Shaquille O'Neal, before there were headlines, trophies, and spotlights. Back then it was just Lucille and her young son, in a world determined to keep them in the shadows. Lucille had grown up in the Deep South, where the sting of racism wasn't just an undercurrent, it was a flood, threatening to drown. The polite racism of her adulthood was nothing compared to the overt hostility of her youth. She remembered the sting of words hurled in grocery stores, the suspicion-laced glances from neighbors, the way doors were quietly shut in her face. Her parents had taught her to keep her head down, to smile and nod, to swallow her pride so thickly it became a part of her throat. When Shaquille was born, Lucille had vowed it would be different. She had worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, cleaning houses, waiting tables, scrubbing floors so slick she could see her reflection. She had faced landlords who muttered about people like you, had sat through school meetings where teachers dismissed her son as trouble waiting to happen, and she had swallowed every indignity, filing it away not as defeat but as fuel. Smile through it, she would murmur to herself, smoothing her uniform, braiding Shaq's hair with practiced hands. They want you to break, but you don't have to give them that. Through the years she had nurtured not just Shaq's physical gifts but his spirit. She taught him to shake hands firmly, to speak with clarity and conviction, to remember that humility wasn't weakness but a quiet kind of power. She corrected his posture, his pronunciation, and most importantly, his understanding of the world around him. When Shaq rose to fame, when his name became a staple in households, Lucille stayed grounded. She had seen what the world did to successful black men, how it lifted them only to watch for the stumble, the misstep, the headline that would bring them down. She remained his confidant, his compass, the quiet hand on his shoulder, reminding him of where he came from, and the weight he carried. At the academy now, Lucille's reputation meant nothing. Here she was just an older woman walking into a Jiu Jitsu class, her presence an anomaly to students like Travis, the cocky head instructor who barely masked his amusement. His clipped remarks and exaggerated patience with her progress were sprinkled with condescension. "Take your time, Miss O'Neal," he would say, smirking as though addressing a child. Then there was Sierra, a young woman with sharp cheekbones and an even sharper tongue, her jealousy of Lucille's quiet presence palpable. Sierra was used to being the center of attention in classes, the one whose technique was praised loudly, whose status was elevated by proximity to Travis. Lucille's quiet composure grated on her nerves. She would toss barbed comments like, "It's sweet you're trying, Miss O'Neal, but you know this isn't a hobby class, right?" And then flash a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Lucille never bit back. She would simply nod, adjust her gi, and continue with her drills. It wasn't about showing up for them. It wasn't about proving she belonged. It was about something deeper, something they couldn't understand. Because what none of them knew was that Lucille hadn't stepped onto this mat as a novice. Years earlier, when Shaq was still carving his path in the world of basketball, Lucille had formed an unexpected friendship with a man named Reggie Waller, a quiet, unassuming figure who had once competed in jiu-jitsu tournaments before fading into the background. Reggie had been a janitor at the recreation center where Shaq practiced as a boy, and it was through idle conversations and shared stories of resilience that he and Lucille had formed a bond. Reggie had noticed something in Lucille, a steeliness beneath the surface, a quiet fire that refused to be extinguished. He offered to teach her jiu-jitsu, not in a flashy dojo, but in the dim back rooms of the rec center, after hours when the building echoed with silence. For years she trained under his guidance, learning not the showy, crowd-pleasing techniques, but the subtle, efficient moves that relied on leverage, timing, and strategy. Lucille's body had grown older, yes, but her understanding of balance, of breath, of control had only deepened. She learned to read her opponent's intentions, to anticipate their next move, before they even committed to it. She wasn't the fastest, wasn't the strongest, but she was unshakably steady. At the academy, these skills remained hidden. She had signed up under her own name, never boasting of her connection to Shaq, never mentioning her history with Reggie. The instructors saw only what they wanted to see, a middle-aged woman, perhaps a touch too slow, a bit too polite. They discounted her before she even stepped on the mat. But Lucille's strength was never in her muscles. It was in her refusal to break, in her understanding of when to speak and when to stay silent, in her ability to let people believe what they wanted, only to quietly rewrite the narrative on her own terms. As she listened to Travis droning instructions, as Sierra threw her glances dripping with false sweetness, Lucille's mind stayed steady. The academy was a microcosm of the world she had navigated her entire life. A world that discounted her, underestimated her, sought to box her into neat, dismissible categories. But she knew better. Her hands flexed at her sides, her breath slow and controlled. She wasn't here to fight their expectations. She was here to remind herself of the quiet power she had always possessed, to reclaim a part of herself that had been submerged beneath the layers of motherhood, duty, and silent endurance. The academy's walls vibrated faintly with the low hum of conversation, the slap of feet on mats, the echo of laughter tinged with mockery. But Lucille stood in the eye of the storm, her presence steady, her resolve clear. This wasn't just about DeAndre, though his humiliation had sparked something within her. This was about all the times she had been overlooked, belittled, told she wasn't enough. It was about the weight she had carried, not just as Lucille O'Neal's mother, but as Lucille, the woman who had weathered storms no one else had seen. And as the day's training wound down, and students filed out of the academy, still unaware of the storm that was brewing in Lucille's quiet strength, she remained behind for a few extra drills. Alone on the mat, her movements were fluid. She flowed through submissions with the calm precision of a woman who wasn't learning but remembering. Outside, the sky shifted to twilight, casting long shadows through the windows. Lucille O'Neal, overlooked and underestimated, stood in the fading light, her mind sharp, her spirit unbowed. The academy had seen only a glimpse of her. The real story was just beginning. The academy buzzed with an uneasy energy. As students gathered around the mats, anticipation thickening the air, like humidity before a storm. The open mat challenge was always a spectacle, an excuse for brash displays of dominance under the thin veneer of friendly competition. Travis, the cocky instructor, stood at the edge of the mat, his grin sharp as he surveyed the assembly of students, each eager to prove themselves, or at the very least, to avoid embarrassment. "Open mat submissions today," Travis called out, his voice slicing through the murmurs. "You know the drill. Step up, show your skills, or watch from the sidelines." The usual suspects shifted forward, eyes glinting with barely disguised ambition. But then, through the crowd's rustle, Lucille O'Neal stepped into the circle. The murmur turned to outright laughter, and several students exchanged incredulous glances. Sierra smirked from her corner, her arms crossed in amusement. Travis's smile widened, almost predatory. Well, he drawled, stepping closer. "Ms. O'Neal wants a turn?" Lucille met his gaze, her expression steady, betraying none of the heat rising beneath her skin. She gave a small nod, her voice low but clear. "I'm stepping in." A ripple of disbelief spread through the onlookers. Whispers threaded through the crowd like smoke. Derisive, incredulous. "She's serious? She'll get crushed. What's she thinking?" But Lucille's gaze remained unshaken. Inside, her heart beat a calm, steady rhythm. The years of quiet, hidden training with Reggie, the lessons learned in silence, the resilience built in the shadows. This moment had always been hers, whether they understood it or not. Travis's eyes gleamed with thinly veiled malice. "All right then," he said, drawing out the words like a slow blade. "Brayden, you're up." From the edge of the circle, Brayden emerged. A black belt, broad-shouldered and smug, his confidence radiating like heat off asphalt. His reputation at the academy was one of precise, almost clinical submission skills. He was known for his brutal armbars, his suffocating chokes, the way he left opponents tapping before they even registered the trap closing in. As he stepped forward, Brayden shot Lucille a smirk, a silent taunt that spoke volumes. "This won't take long." Lucille inclined her head slightly, acknowledging him without the slightest flicker of intimidation. Her G-sleeves were rolled back neatly, her hands flexing at her sides, her breath measured. Every movement she made was deliberate, economical, controlled. The students fell into a tense silence, the laughter now edged with unease. Travis clapped Brayden on the shoulder, murmuring something too low to catch, and then signaled for the match to begin. Brayden crouched, his stance loose but watchful, a predator circling a presumed easy kill. Lucille mirrored his movements with quiet precision, her feet shifting subtly on the mat, her eyes locked on his. Her calm was unnerving, a stillness that made Brayden's initial movements falter ever so slightly. The match began. Brayden lunged, quick and forceful, aiming for a rapid takedown, his hands reaching for Lucille's lapel. But before his grip could tighten, Lucille pivoted, her body angling with deceptive ease. She sidestepped his advance, her hands redirecting his momentum with the grace of a practiced tactician. Braden stumbled. Not enough to fall, but enough for confusion to flicker across his face. Before he could recover, Lucille's left arm snaked around his collar, her right hand gripping his sleeve. In a single fluid movement that seemed almost too fast for comprehension, she shifted her weight, her hips turning with the force of memory and mastery. Braden's eyes widened as his balance broke beneath her. He tried to counter, but Lucille's movements were already ahead of him, her body coiling with a precision that spoke of years of quiet, relentless practice. In 10 seconds, it was over. Braden's body hit the mat with a sharp thud, his limbs locked, his breath trapped in a chokehold so flawlessly executed, it took him a heartbeat to realize he was caught. His hands slapped against the mat in a rapid, desperate tap-out, the universal signal of surrender. The sound echoed through the silent room, sharp and final. The crowd froze. For a long, suspended moment, no one moved. The students stared, disbelief etched into their features. Even Travis's confident grin had slipped, replaced by a thin line of astonishment. Sierra's smirk was wiped clean, her mouth parted in shock. Braden lay there, blinking up at Lucille, who calmly released her hold and stepped back, giving him room to sit up, his face flushed with humiliation. Lucille's expression remained composed, her breath controlled, her hands resting lightly on her hips. The years of preparation, the quiet strength she had built in silence, radiated from her like a steady pulse. She didn't gloat, she didn't speak, she simply stood there, her calmness louder than any declaration. Braden climbed to his feet, his movements stiff and wary. He avoided her gaze, stepping back into the circle of students, his confidence fractured. The room was thick with tension, the air sharp with the scent of disbelief. Travis cleared his throat, his voice strained, as he tried to regain control of the moment. Well, impressive, he managed, though the usual cocky tone was absent. Let's keep it going. But the energy had shifted. The students were no longer watching Lucille with amused contempt. Now there was a flicker of something else, respect tinged with unease. The laughter was gone, replaced by quiet murmurs, the realization settling in that they had underestimated the quiet woman standing at the center of the mat. Lucille stepped off the mat with quiet dignity, her back straight, her steps deliberate. Her heart was steady, her mind clear. This wasn't just about Braden, or even Travis. It wasn't just about the Academy's smug dismissal of her presence. It was about every moment she had been told she wasn't enough. It was about reclaiming her narrative, about standing tall in a space where she was expected to fold. Outside, the sky remained bright, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the parking lot. Inside the Academy, the atmosphere had changed, the realization settling in that Lucille O'Neal was not to be dismissed. As Lucille reached for her water bottle and quietly gathered her belongings, the whispers continued behind her, but their tone had shifted. They were no longer mocking, they were questioning. And somewhere far from the Academy, Shaquille O'Neal, Shaq continued his work in the world, unaware that his mother had just quietly, methodically, and decisively changed the entire dynamic of a place that had tried to belittle her. The match was over, but the story was only just beginning. The shockwaves from Lucille's submission reverberated through the Martial Arts Academy like an unexpected aftershock. Whispers gathered in corners, murmurs thickening around water coolers, and glances thrown sideways as if seeking confirmation of what they had witnessed. Some chalked it up to sheer luck, a fluke, a moment where the stars aligned in favor of the quiet, older woman. Others were less willing to dismiss it, their curiosity tempered by an undercurrent of discomfort. Instructors shifted nervously. Students, once eager to dominate the open mat, now hesitated, second-guessing their own bravado. The tension wasn't loud but pervasive, an invisible current rippling through the dojo's fabric. Travis, always the one to command the room with slick confidence, found his usual smirk faltering in the face of uncertain murmurs. He lingered near the office, speaking in low tones to Sierra, whose arms were folded tightly, her jaw set with a bitterness that couldn't be concealed. She humiliated Braden, Sierra hissed, her voice sharp, a mix of disbelief and resentment, made him look like a fool in front of everyone. Travis's lips thinned, his brow furrowed, as he stared across the training floor, where Lucille, calm and composed, collected her belongings. It was a fluke, he said, his tone a mix of dismissal and uncertainty. Beginner's luck. Braden wasn't prepared for her weird, clumsy moves. It won't happen again. But as much as he tried to convince himself, the unease lingered. Sierra's mind worked furiously, her thoughts a tangled web of jealousy and thinly veiled racism. To her, Lucille's presence wasn't just an anomaly. It was a threat. A woman of her background, her age, her race, standing on the same mat and commanding attention. It gnawed at her, stoking a quiet fury. Meanwhile, the story refused to stay contained within the walls of the academy. Rumors trickled out, catching the attention of local media outlets, always eager for a headline. A few phone videos, blurry but unmistakable, made their way onto social platforms. They showed Lucille's flawless takedown and Braden's humiliating tap-out. The footage spread quickly, the comments section filling with incredulous disbelief and a ripple of admiration for the older woman who'd bested the arrogant black belt. It wasn't long before word reached Lucille O'Neal. Sitting in his home office, phone buzzing with texts and missed calls, Shaq read through the messages, his brows knitting together as he processed the fragments of the story. His mother, at a martial arts academy, submitting a black belt. And now, whispers of mistreatment, of racial undertones threading through the reactions. He stood slowly, the weight of his name, his legacy, pressing down like a familiar pressure. He wasn't one for showdowns, but when it came to his mother, when it came to family, the lines were drawn. The next day, Shaq's arrival at the academy was anything but subtle. His towering figure cast a long shadow as he stepped through the glass doors, his tailored jacket stretching across his broad shoulders. Conversations stilled, phones lifted, students froze in mid-step. His presence wasn't aggressive. It didn't need to be. It was simply undeniable. Travis, standing near the front desk, straightened instinctively, his nervousness poorly disguised beneath a thin veneer of authority. Sierra, a few paces behind, paled visibly, her earlier bravado crumbling in the face of Shaq's quiet, controlled demeanor. "Mr. O'Neal," Travis said, forcing a smile, his voice carrying a practiced friendliness. "What a surprise. What brings you here?" Shaq's eyes flicked to him, steady and unreadable. "I heard there was an incident here involving my mother," he said, his tone even, each word weighted with quiet intent. Travis's smile faltered, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. "Oh, you know how things get blown out of proportion. Just a friendly match. A little misunderstanding." Shaq's gaze didn't waver. A misunderstanding. He let the question hang in the air, his height and quiet calm pressing down like gravity. Around them students lingered, pretending not to eavesdrop while hanging on every word. Lucille, standing near the entrance to the training room, stepped forward. "Shaq, it's fine," she said softly, her voice carrying the calm reassurance of a mother used to smoothing troubled waters. "It was just a match, no need to make a scene." But Shaq turned to her, his expression softening, his voice dropping just enough to be heard only by her. "It's not about making a scene, Mom," he said. "It's about making sure people know you don't stand alone." Lucille's lips pressed together in a faint, reluctant smile. She appreciated his presence, his protection, but she also understood the power of quiet resilience. "I'm not worried," she murmured. Yet the academy had already absorbed the shift. Shaq's presence had altered the atmosphere, his quiet but undeniable message to the instructors and students, to Travis, to Sierra, to the ones who had whispered and laughed, was clear. Their actions had not gone unnoticed. As media whispers stirred outside the academy, cameras catching glimpses of Shaq's visit, Lucille maintained her composure. She downplayed her victory, shrugging off questions, her voice measured and calm. "It was just a match," she said to those who dared to ask. "I've been practicing for a while." But Shaq saw the glint of quiet pride in her eyes, the same spark he had seen when she had stood by him through years of challenges, racism, and relentless pressure. "You should tell them," he said later, when they stood side by side near the exit. "You should share your story." Lucille hesitated, her gaze thoughtful. "Not yet," she said. "Let them wonder a bit longer." Shaq's grin broke through, a slow, appreciative smile that acknowledged her quiet strength. Around them, the academy buzzed with a different energy. The tide had shifted, though not everyone was willing to admit it. Behind closed doors, Travis and Sierra whispered, their resentment deepening, their plans twisting into something more desperate. They couldn't let Lucille's victory stand, couldn't let her presence disrupt their carefully maintained hierarchy. They plotted, their words low and bitter, driven by jealousy and the undercurrent of systemic bias that had colored their view of who belonged and who didn't. But outside, in the gathering light of late afternoon, Lucille and Shaq stood tall. one with the unspoken history of resilience, the other with the protective weight of fame and power. Their combined presence sent a silent message to anyone willing to listen. The match had been won, but the real challenge, the quiet battle for respect, dignity, and equality, was only beginning. The victory over Braden wasn't fading into yesterday's news. Instead, it was igniting something bigger. Students exchanged glances in the hallways. Instructors held hushed conversations in corners, and even the front desk staff checked emails with nervous flicks of their eyes. Beneath the polished veneer of the academy's branding, cracks were beginning to show. The day's classes moved sluggishly. Lucille, ever composed, moved through the academy with her usual grace, but her silence was now punctuated with subtle smiles that hinted at a deeper story. It wasn't until late afternoon that the first real thread of revelation began to unwind, exposing the hidden layers of her journey. In a small, windowless back room, a conversation between Clayton, the academy's co-owner, and Miranda, his sharp-eyed partner, simmered with low voices and the rustle of hastily printed emails. Clayton's usually easy demeanor was gone, replaced by a taut line across his jaw as he scanned the damning subject lines of messages forwarded from corporate. This can't get out," he hissed, tossing a stack of printouts onto the desk. "If anyone connects the dots between the Braden incident and the other cases." Miranda's voice, low and edged with frustration, cut in. "They're already talking. Social's blowing up, and Lucille's victory isn't just an isolated win. People are digging into our past. We've kept the lid on for years, but this could unravel everything." In the shadows of their panic, emails spoke of complaints buried, videos quietly deleted, and subtle warnings issued to students who dared to speak out. It wasn't the first time the academy's polished image had been threatened by whispers of racism and favoritism, but it was the first time someone like Lucille had stood at the center of the storm, her quiet resilience now magnifying the flaws in their system. While the owners schemed behind closed doors, Lucille stood outside under the fading sun, her thoughts drifting to the past. The world around her blurred into the sounds of the city, distant car horns, the rhythmic hum of traffic, the occasional call of a child's laughter, and then, as if conjured from memory, a voice that echoed from years long gone. "Lucille, you've always been stronger than they gave you credit for." The voice belonged to Mr. Caldwell, once a shadowed figure in her life, now the missing piece that brought her quiet strength into focus. He had seen something in her years ago, when the world had nearly broken her. Back then, Lucille had been a single mother working multiple jobs, her days a blur of exhaustion, and her nights filled with a suffocating silence. Racism had followed her everywhere, from landlords who refused her applications, to shopkeepers who eyed her with suspicion, to an attack in a parking lot that left her bruised and shaken, her spirit teetering on the edge of collapse. But it was Mr. Caldwell, a retired Jiu Jitsu master, whose name once echoed in martial arts circles, who pulled her back from that edge. He'd watched her from afar, recognizing not just her pain, but the quiet fire beneath it. One evening, after hearing of the attack, he'd approached her at the community center where she volunteered, his voice calm and steady. "Come train with me," he'd said. "You're stronger than you know." What started as hesitant lessons in a cramped basement gym had blossomed into years of private training. Mr. Caldwell taught her not just techniques and holds, but the patience and precision of strategy. His methods weren't about flashy moves or brute force. They were about resilience, about knowing when to bend and when to hold firm. Through his guidance, Lucille rediscovered a sense of control over her own life, a confidence rooted not in aggression, but in quiet, unshakable determination. Now, standing in the present, Lucille's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. The academy could speculate all it wanted, but they didn't know the foundation upon which her victory stood. They didn't know the hours she'd spent mastering the very techniques that had brought Braden to his knees in seconds. Inside the academy, Travis's voice rang out, louder than before, his tone strained as he tried to reassert control over the narrative. "We can't let one fluke match rewrite the rules," he declared to a group of instructors and students gathered near the training mats. "This isn't some charity dojo. We have standards to maintain." But the unease in his words was unmistakable. Even his closest supporters exchanged glances, the certainty in their expressions starting to crumble. Lucille's win wasn't just a personal triumph. It was becoming a symbol, a challenge to the assumptions that had long governed the academy's social order. At the same time, a quiet buzz hummed through the local martial arts community. Old-timers remembered Mr. Caldwell, Stories of his quiet brilliance resurfacing, threads connecting Lucille's name to his legacy. Some whispered that Caldwell's reclusive nature had been a shield against the very discrimination Lucille was now dismantling. Others speculated that her years of silent training under his watchful eye had transformed her into a master in her own right, hidden in plain sight. Back in the office, Miranda slammed her laptop shut, her face pale. "We need damage control," she said, her voice brittle. "If the media gets hold of the Caldwell connection, if they dig into the past complaints, we're finished." Clayton rubbed his temples, his mind racing. "We spin it. We talk about community engagement, charity events, paint ourselves as the good guys." But even as they plotted, the truth was already slipping through their fingers. Outside, Lucille drew a slow, measured breath, her gaze steady. The academy's sleek facade, the whispered insults, the dismissive glances, all of it had crumbled beneath her quiet persistence. The revelation wasn't hers to shout, but it was there for anyone willing to look deeper. Her victory wasn't a fluke. It was the culmination of years of struggle, resilience, and a master's belief in her potential when the world refused to see it. And now, with the academy's owner scrambling, with Travis and Sierra grasping for control, with students beginning to question the unspoken rules, Lucille knew the tide was turning. The match had been just the beginning. The real story, the one built on truth, integrity, and the unbreakable strength of a woman long underestimated, was only now being revealed. It began with a leak, an anonymous tip to local news outlets, suggesting that Lucille's stunning victory over Braden wasn't a display of hidden mastery, but a staged act. Carefully edited footage emerged, clipped at just the right moments to make it seem as though Braden had let her win, portraying Lucille as an opportunist chasing clout. Headlines ran with the story: "Senior wins martial arts match in suspected stunt. Shaq's mother caught in controversy. Jiu Jitsu Academy scandal rocks community." The Academy's social media channels, once flooded with awe and admiration for Lucille, now brimmed with accusations, snide comments, and manufactured outrage. The tide had turned swiftly, viciously. Miranda, ever the tactician, ensured influencers and pseudo-experts weighed in with thinly veiled criticism, painting Lucille as a fraud exploiting her connection to Shaq for attention. Even news anchors, sensing the shift, began to cast doubt, their words measured but laced with insinuation. Lucille sat in her small apartment, the glow of her phone screen painting her face in soft light. Her inbox overflowed with messages, some supportive but most drenched in venom. She scrolled past headlines that twisted her truth, comments that mocked her age, her race, her integrity. Each word was a lash, each post a brick in the wall they were building to isolate her. She set the phone down with trembling hands, her breath catching as she fought the rising tide of despair. Her living room, once a quiet sanctuary, now felt like a cage. She gazed at the shelves lined with photos of Shaq, his beaming smile, his towering frame, his undeniable charisma, and wondered if this storm would pull him under too. She thought of the countless hours she'd spent building him up, teaching him strength not just of body but of character. And now it seemed, her quiet resilience had made them both targets. Outside, reporters began to gather. Camera crews milled on the sidewalk, waiting for a glimpse of her, a comment, a crack in her calm. Shaq's name trended on social media, hashtags laced with snark and scandal. Opportunists, eager for clicks and clout, piled on with rumors and exaggerations. Even some within the martial arts community, jealous of Lucille's sudden spotlight, joined the chorus, their voices adding fuel to the fire. Shaq, ever the pillar of strength, stood at the eye of the storm. His publicist urged silence, cautioning against stoking the controversy. But Shaq's instinct was to shield his mother, to call out the injustice with the full weight of his platform. Still, Lucille's quiet voice echoed in his mind. Sometimes, silence speaks louder than any shout. Torn between defending her and respecting her dignity, he hesitated, caught in a tug-of-war between impulse and wisdom. Back at the academy, Travis and Sierra basked in the chaos. They staged casual conversations, careful to be overheard as they speculated about the real story behind Lucille's match. "It was all an act," Sierra said loudly, one afternoon near the front desk, her voice dripping with manufactured disdain. "I heard Braden was told to throw the match for PR. Makes sense, doesn't it? A feel-good story sells better than the truth." Even students who had once admired Lucille's quiet strength found themselves questioning what they had seen. Doubt crept in like a slow fog, obscuring the memory of her flawless technique, The moment of stunned silence after Braden's tap, whispers of her being a plant, a PR stunt, a pawn in a bigger game echoed in locker rooms, over post-class smoothies, on group chats. For Lucille, the betrayal cut deep, not because they believed the lies, but because they were so quick to turn. She had stood tall, quietly dignified in the face of ridicule, but now found herself painted as a fraud. The media's narrative wasn't just a blow to her pride, it was a threat to everything she had built, to the legacy she hoped to leave for Shaq and beyond. In the quiet of her apartment, she sat on the edge of her couch, staring into the distance, the hum of the city outside muffled by her thoughts. Doubt gnawed at her resolve. Could she fight back? Would it even matter? The machine arrayed against her was vast, its influence deep. Each headline, each twisted story, each whisper of staged submission, felt like a stone on her chest, pressing down, making it harder to breathe. She thought of Mr. Caldwell, of his quiet encouragement, his belief in her strength. His lessons had been about more than Jiu Jitsu. They had been about resilience, about standing firm when the world demanded you kneel. But even Caldwell's voice felt distant now, like a memory fading under the weight of present despair. A knock at her door broke the silence. It was soft, hesitant. Lucille hesitated, her fingers hovering over her phone before she rose to answer it. On the other side stood a young woman, a student from the academy, her eyes wide with apprehension. She held out a folded note, her hands trembling slightly. "I just thought you should know," she stammered, then turned and fled down the hall. Lucille unfolded the note slowly, her eyes scanning the scrawled handwriting. It was a copy of an internal email from Miranda, discussing the smear campaign, hinting at fabricated evidence, and mocking Lucille's resilience. The words hit her like a slap, but this time, her spine straightened. The note was a spark in the darkness, a reminder that the truth wasn't entirely buried. She sank into the chair by the window, her mind racing. The low point had arrived, the moment when the weight of lies and betrayal threatened to crush her. But beneath the pain, a flicker of resolve began to smolder. They had tried to erase her story, to drown her in manufactured scandal, but there were cracks in their armor. Allies she hadn't anticipated were surfacing, whispers of truth, hints of rebellion. Her phone buzzed with a message from Shaq. "Mom, I'm with you. Whatever you decide, just say the word." Lucille closed her eyes, drawing a deep, steadying breath. She wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The road ahead would be treacherous, the battle uphill, but she had faced worse. The world might have turned against her, but she still held the truth. And in the quiet depths of her soul, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The story wasn't over, not by a long shot. Word had spread quickly. An unexpected exhibition match, headlined not by a celebrity athlete or a rising star but by Lucille O'Neal. Whispers turned into speculation, speculation into eager chatter. The same media outlets that had once cast her as a fraud now scrambled to cover the unfolding story. Shaq had orchestrated it all quietly, leveraging his connections not to seek revenge, but to hand the world a truth it couldn't ignore. The venue, an open-air plaza bathed in soft lighting and humming with conversation, was packed. Fans, curious onlookers, and martial arts enthusiasts gathered, their murmurs blending into a steady hum. At the center stood a simple mat, its boundaries marked with white tape. There was no pomp, no excessive ceremony, just a quiet confidence, a stage set for Lucille to reclaim her narrative. Lucille arrived in understated elegance, her gi crisp and unadorned, save for a subtle emblem on the sleeve. A nod to Mr. Caldwell's private mentorship. Her steps were measured, her gaze steady as she took her place at the edge of the mat. No longer the hesitant woman weathering snide comments. She exuded a calm resolve, a quiet power that drew attention without demanding it. Across from her stood Zane, renowned, respected, a black belt known for his disciplined technique and stoic demeanor. His expression betrayed no malice, only professional respect. Shaq lingered at the sidelines, his towering frame unmistakable, his expression one of quiet pride. He didn't wave to the cameras or give interviews. Instead, he watched, arms folded, his presence steady and reassuring. This was Lucille's moment, not his. The announcer's voice carried across the plaza, inviting polite applause before stepping back. No theatrics followed, just Lucille and Zane, standing on opposite sides of the mat, bowing in mutual respect before approaching the center. The air thickened with anticipation as the match began. Their movements were deliberate, precise, Zane tested Lucille's defense with controlled pressure, his hands seeking openings, but she met him with quiet confidence, countering his advances with fluid grace. The crowd, initially subdued, leaned in as the rhythm of the match unfolded, not the clash of egos but the intricate dance of skill honed over years. Lucille's techniques, so often dismissed because of her age and gender, now commanded attention. She flowed from position to position, her transitions seamless, her counters sharp without being aggressive. Zane's composure wavered as Lucille's strategy unfolded. She wasn't overpowering him. She was outthinking him, anticipating his moves, using his own momentum against him. The crowd gasped softly as she executed a flawless sweep, shifting their balance, and in a swift, almost imperceptible movement, applied a submission that left no room for argument. Zane tapped. The match ended not with a roar of triumph, but with a collective intake of breath, a moment of realization washing over the audience like a wave. Lucille released the hold immediately, helping Zane to his feet with a quiet nod of respect. The plaza erupted into applause, not the frenzied cheers of spectacle, but the warm, genuine appreciation of witnessing mastery. Cameras flashed, capturing the grace of Lucille's bow, the calm dignity with which she acknowledged the crowd. For a moment, the noise of scandal, the whispers of deceit, were drowned out by the undeniable clarity of her performance. Shaq stepped onto the mat, his hand resting lightly on Lucille's shoulder. Their eyes met, a silent conversation of shared pride, of resilience rewarded not by spectacle but by truth. His quiet presence beside her was a reminder. This wasn't just about proving a point, it was about reclaiming dignity, about showing the world that strength wasn't measured by age or stereotypes, but by unwavering resolve and quiet mastery. Miranda and Clayton, forced to attend by the pressure of media scrutiny, stood at the edge of the crowd, their faces tight with forced smiles. The narrative they had so carefully constructed unraveled before them, exposed by the undeniable evidence of Lucille's skill. A public apology, issued later that evening, was formal and sterile, but the damage to their credibility was irreversible. The whispers about their discriminatory practices, once dismissed as rumor, now carried weight. In the days that followed, headlines shifted. Articles celebrated Lucille's unexpected triumph, not as a stunt, but as a testament to quiet resilience. Op-eds explored the deeper themes, how her story challenged assumptions about race, age, and perseverance. Social media, once a breeding ground for mockery, transformed into a chorus of admiration, with users sharing their own stories of overcoming bias and embracing inner strength. Lucille, though quietly pleased, remained grounded. She continued her training with Mr. Caldwell, her movements growing more confident, but never boastful. When asked for interviews, she spoke not of revenge or vindication, but of the importance of persistence, of the quiet power found in knowing one's worth, and standing firm in the face of adversity. Shaq, in his subtle way, used the moment to amplify conversations about inclusivity in martial arts and beyond. He supported local programs that encouraged participation from underrepresented communities, emphasizing the value of resilience over recognition. His involvement wasn't loud or showy, it was consistent, thoughtful, a reflection of the lessons he'd learned from his mother's journey. As for the academy, its leadership changed in the wake of the scandal. New instructors were brought in, policies revised, and efforts made to repair the broken trust. It was a slow process, but one marked by genuine reflection and a commitment to fostering an environment where every student felt valued, regardless of background or appearance. Lucille's quiet victory rippled far beyond the mat. It sparked conversations in living rooms and boardrooms alike, challenging entrenched assumptions and inspiring others to confront bias, whether subtle or overt. Her story wasn't a flash in the pan. It was a testament to the enduring power of dignity, of standing tall not with fists, but with grace. In the final moments of the event, as the plaza lights dimmed and the crowd dispersed, Lucille stood at the center of the mat, her gaze lifting to the night sky. Shaq joined her, their silhouettes framed by the soft glow of street lamps. They exchanged no words, their silence speaking volume. This wasn't an ending, but a new beginning, a quiet equilibrium, where truth, once obscured, now stood illuminated for all to see. The morning sun stretched across the newly painted exterior of the academy, its warm rays catching the vibrant mural that now graced the side of the building. The mural, a stunning blend of realism and abstract expression, depicted Lucille O'Neal in the moment she had submitted Braden. Her movements fluid and precise. Bold, sweeping letters crowned the scene, Strength has no age, no color. It wasn't just an image, it was a statement, a declaration woven into the very fabric of the community. Inside, the dojo buzzed with a different kind of energy. The usual hierarchy, the competitive tension that had once dominated, was replaced by a hum of quiet collaboration. Mats were spread across the polished wooden floor, and a diverse group of women and girls gathered in small circles. Their expressions were a mixture of curiosity and determination, of nervous excitement and cautious hope. Lucille moved among them, her presence calm yet commanding. She wore a simple black gi, the same understated emblem from Mr. Caldwell's lineage stitched onto the sleeve. Her instructions were clear, her voice even, her movements deliberate. She demonstrated not just techniques but the confidence behind them, the knowledge of one's own strength, the understanding of timing and balance, the awareness that control often lay in stillness. At the edge of the room, Shaq assisted quietly. He set up equipment, adjusted mats, and offered words of encouragement when needed. His towering presence, once the focal point of cameras and headlines, now blended seamlessly into the background. He wasn't here as a celebrity or a symbol, he was here as a son, supporting his mother's vision without overshadowing it. The seminar wasn't about flashy submissions or aggressive drills. It was about empowerment, about planting seeds of confidence in those who had long been taught to shrink back. Lucille shared not just techniques but stories of resilience, of overcoming subtle and overt prejudice, of the quiet power found in standing tall and holding one's ground. As the session progressed, participants who had begun hesitantly now moved with growing assurance. They practiced escapes and counters, learned to use an opponent's momentum against them, discovered the quiet satisfaction of control without aggression. The air was filled with laughter, occasional gasps of realization, and the steady rhythm of mat work. It was a scene of transformation, of fear melting into focus, of hesitation turning into resolve. In a quiet corner, a young girl with braided hair and a determined set to her jaw practiced a wristlock under Lucille's watchful eye. Her movements were clumsy at first, but Lucille's patient guidance smoothed them out. The girl's face lit up when the technique finally clicked, her excitement palpable. Lucille offered a soft smile, her gaze steady, her approval clear but understated. The moment wasn't about accolades, it was about the quiet acknowledgement of potential. Shaq's deep voice rumbled softly from across the room, as he helped another group perfect their footwork. His tone was gentle, free of the bravado often associated with his public persona. Here, he was simply a man passing on knowledge, sharing in the quiet revolution his mother had sparked. His presence reassured the hesitant, encouraged the bold, and added a subtle layer of inspiration that didn't overshadow Lucille's leadership. As the seminar neared its conclusion, Lucille gathered everyone into a circle on the mats. She stood at the center, her posture straight, her expression calm. The participants, now visibly more confident, listened intently. Her voice carried across the room, steady and resonant. "Strength isn't about being loud or being seen," she said. "It's about knowing who you are, what you stand for, and refusing to let anyone tell you otherwise. It's about resilience, the quiet, steady kind that carries you through when the world tries to push you down." The room fell into a respectful silence, each participant absorbing her words, their expressions reflecting not just understanding, but a newfound sense of self. Some glanced at the mural through the windows, its bold colors a reminder that their strength, like Lucille's, transcended superficial judgments. Shaq stepped forward, his voice low but carrying. "My mom's right," he said. "It's not about winning loud or showing off. It's about grace under pressure, about standing tall when it matters most. That's what real strength is." His words weren't delivered with a performer's flair, but with the quiet conviction of someone who had witnessed strength in its truest form. The participants responded with nods, murmurs of agreement, and a few quiet smiles. They weren't just learning moves, they were absorbing a mindset, one that would stay with them long after the seminar ended. The camera, if it were documenting this scene, would pull back slowly, revealing not just the group within the dojo, but the mural outside, its colors vivid against the building's facade. The image of Lucille's submission of Braden wasn't frozen in triumph, but captured in a moment of elegant resilience, a reminder of the journey that had brought her here. The words above it shimmered in the sunlight: "Strength has no age, no color." As the seminar concluded, and participants began to gather their belongings, the atmosphere remained charged with a quiet sense of accomplishment. Lucille stood at the entrance, offering parting words of encouragement. shaking hands, sharing brief genuine moments of connection. Shaq assisted with the cleanup, his movements unhurried, his demeanor relaxed. They didn't seek the spotlight. It followed them quietly, drawn not to spectacle but to the authenticity of their presence. Outside, as the last rays of sunlight bathed the city in golden light, Lucille and Shaq stood side by side, looking out at the mural. The air was filled with the sounds of distant traffic, the hum of evening settling over the neighborhood. It was a peaceful, almost cinematic moment, a visual echo of the story that had unfolded. Lucille's gaze lingered on the mural, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Not bad for a woman who was supposed to stay quiet," she murmured. Shaq chuckled softly, his voice warm. "Not bad at all, Mom." They turned toward the street, their steps unhurried, their silhouettes framed by the glowing mural behind them. The world, once quick to dismiss, now watched with quiet respect. The story of Lucille O'Neal wasn't just about a submission or a scandal. It was a testament to resilience, to grace, to the quiet, steady strength that changes narratives, one step at a time. Dive deeper into the world, where quiet resilience flips the script. Share in the journey of those who dare to stand tall, when it counts. Witness the unseen power in every overlooked fighter. Discover what it truly means to rewrite your own narrative. The story isn't over, it's only just begun.